All right, this is the Pro Wrestling Illustrated podcast. Back once again. I'm Al Castle with my co-host Brian Solomon. How's it going?
Very well, Al. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here as always.
Yes, been a few weeks, so we got some catching up to do. But thankfully, I feel like every time we get together, there's been huge blockbuster story one after the other. There hasn't actually been. There's no shortage of things to talk about, but thankfully, it's a little quiet. So it's good. We could catch up on some stuff. Look ahead to some very big shows later this summer, stadium shows by WWE, obviously SummerSlam, AEW coming up with All In, and those shows are starting to take shape. So we'll talk about them. Also coming off some pretty big shows, Money in the Bank and Forbidden Door, which I got to attend and actually really enjoyed. And what else? Might talk a little Hulk Hogan, actually. Hulk Hogan and at the Republican National Convention. So maybe a little presidential politics, even though we won't really go into presidential politics, but I think it's kind of an interesting topic given where Hulk Hogan is at these days. And what else? John Cena was the other topic I definitely wanted to touch on. Maybe the biggest item of news coming out of Money in the Bank was his retirement, and we could look ahead to how we think this will go and what the plans are for next year. It is not a one-off match or anything close to it. It sounds like a full-fledged run. And maybe the busy schedule that John Cena's had since he stopped being a full-time worker. And maybe also an opportunity to talk a bit about Cena's legacy in wrestling, which I actually think has kind of evolved just in the last couple of years. And interested to talk about that. So stay tuned. And at the end of the podcast, stay tuned for a fun interview. It is our cover girl, Roxanne Perez, the current NXT Women's Champion. I got to talk to her for a feature in this magazine, and we've got the audio and I think video as well. So stay tuned for that interview. Really a lot of fun. I show up on Zoom. She's got the title, the belt over her shoulder. So it was really cool. And it kind of came together last minute. So a fun discussion with a very newsworthy star. And you can get this latest issue of PWI at PWI-online.com. Lots of fun stuff in here in addition to my feature with Roxanne Perez. Let's see, I always got to go into the index here. We get the real winners and losers of Double or Nothing, another kind of PWI staple that we brought back. A feature on AJ Francis, the former top dollar, on Thekla, on wrestling's new royal couple, Mike Loku and Amira Blair, and so much more. A really fun issue, and go and pick it up at PWI-online.com. A little teaser for the next issue, which I think we're just wrapping up. I also interviewed a top female name in the wrestling industry. I think she's going to be on the cover as well. Very newsworthy. And we have met about the PWI 500. You got to be part of that. I was in Mexico when we sat down and met, and it's completely in place, but it's a lot of it's come together.
Yeah, this is that little window of time where people like you and I can sort of walk around knowing that we know who the number one in the PWI 500 is before anyone else in the world.
Yeah. And it does feel like you've got like this information, and I'll and obviously everything is super on the down low, but I'll mention to like my kids, we just decided that the PWI 500 number one, and they're like, great, Dad.
It's like that everywhere. You know, one of the craziest things to me is several times Dave Meltzer has said how he has kids. You know, I think he's got grown kids by now. I think I'm wondering if he might even be a grandfather by now. But he said how his kids have absolutely no interest or care at all about pro wrestling. So whatever happens to Dave and the Observer one day in the future, it's not going to be taken over by his kids.
Sure. I actually spent my morning because of my day job, and I do this every year, talking to a high school journalism class in a little program that they do at Hofstra University. And a friend of mine who runs it invites me every year. And this year I decided to take my 13-year-old with me because I thought it'd be cool. We could hear about, Dad's work. And, it was a lot to get him to get out of his phone. I think like I'm talking about like really important stuff, and
Yeah.
But I do think you listen to it somewhat. Anyhow, again, spoiler free. I feel like we do this all the time. Early thoughts on the 500 coming together.
Well, I mean, I always stand behind it, and I think it's a great institution in pro wrestling in general. I think this year, I try not to give things away. I'm being very cautious. I don't know what to say that wouldn't give things away, other than just to say that I agree with the choices. I agree with the number one. I agree with the top 10. I'm just really on board. In fact, we were all asked, as you know, in the beginning, to kind of give our own top 10, what it would be, just to get a feel for it. And even my own personal top 10 wasn't that much different from how it wound up shaking out. So, I feel really strong about it.
I think I was the first to submit my top 10. And when it circulated, the feedback I heard from the team was like, yeah, that's kind of what I had. So that's all to say that I don't think, anything too earth shattering in there. One kind of take this year's, I know in a lot of other years, I've been shocked by how deep we might be into a roster of WWE or an AEW. It's more WWE issue years back. Even by the time we were like, at 15 or something, you're like already way low on the card, and it showed how sort of like thin the very top tier was at a time, and that's very much not the case now, where there are I think some pretty top names who didn't make it into the top 10. In some cases, like, didn't make it into the top 15. And I think even some pretty prominent names in the 20s and below. And it is not disparaging them at all, but it speaks to wrestling having a lot of stars right now doing a lot of great work.
Also, it seems like one of those years, there's either the year where it winds up being like a maelstrom of controversy and people pushing back. And I think last year, the fact that we had, which again, completely not planned, we had the three previous members of the Shield as the top three, and that we went with Seth Rollins instead of a Roman Reigns, and we had our reasons to do it. Like, that felt like one of those years where it's like you're inviting controversy. And then you have years like when we did pick Roman Reigns, where it's just sort of like, who's gonna, that's pretty much a consensus. Like, I feel like this is maybe one of those years where it's going to be across the board, kind of a lot of agreement out there. I don't see a lot of pushback as whether or not, it comes down to whether you like the person or not, or as a wrestler or as a performer is one thing. But when you look at it and go like, who should this be? I feel like this is one of the stronger years in terms of the top, not even just the top one, but the top few.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And then obviously we go into the mode of having to like explain how we put it together. And you always have those kind of outliers who are like, Minoru Suzuki should be number one because I love his matches or something like that.
So can we I know we obviously can't mention who's on it, but can we mention, to get in front of some of that, like a couple of the people who could not be ranked because they didn't have enough matches, so that people don't go, oh my God, where the heck is this guy? I wouldn't
say who's not on it, but I'd say there are activity requirements that are hard and fast. Mm-hmm. And if you didn't wrestle that much, you're not getting on, and do the math, right?
Right. Like people know most famously that all through the past decade, despite being, one of the top stars in the business, Brock Lesnar's almost never ranked on the list.
Yeah, I think in the last 10 years, maybe maybe there were 2 years, certainly 1 year. I remember, he had a real busy year where he worked 7 matches.
8 matches, yeah.
Now, the flip side of that is that there are people who do have enough matches to qualify, but might be inactive for a long time, maybe a very long injury hiatus, or just off of TV for a while, and that's going to affect them too. And as much as I think that we try to be mindful of like recency bias, I do think that there is reality when these conversations are being had, that there are things that are fresher on your mind then something happened. But that's why it's good to take something of a scientific approach to the 500. And I think minds would be blown if they saw it's like counting how many matches, 1, 2, 3, and how many of those did he win, and all that stuff. But that is what it takes. And so it is as scientific an approach, I think. But there are some gut things, and you think about like this person had more of an influence than that person. That's why, and we'll talk about him shortly. But I always thought during his run, Cena always needed to be at or near the top because he was so head and shoulders above everybody else in the sport in terms of like what he meant to wrestling, and sometimes it's hard to quantify that, but it's like, right. If Cena's on your show or he's not on your show, it made all the difference.
I think one thing that's distorted it a little bit in recent years, where people I think sometimes get shocked about who's on it, is the simple fact that AEW has come along now, and AEW is a television wrestling company strictly, right. And so they've really underlined sometimes how rarely guys wrestle on TV. Because, like, for what I mean by that is, like, WWF for years and years, WWE, all through the years of the 500, they have this huge house show schedule that we include in the ranking. So even if you had a guy like back in the day, in the 90s, someone like Hulk Hogan, who rarely ever wrestled on TV, he would easily make the list because the guy was out there doing 200 matches a year on the house shows that nobody saw on TV. So that was fine, but you hardly saw him. So now with AEW in the mix, it's like, well, now if you don't see that guy a lot on TV, then he's just not wrestling because there aren't house shows. So you know what I mean? So it raises the issue where people go, well, what about so-and-so for, hardly ever wrestled on TV in the WWF or WWE? Well, it's because they're on the road constantly. So it's a very different kind of schedule, I think, if that makes any sense. That changing of like the way wrestling is presented sometimes I think confuses some readers and fans because they don't realize maybe how much, particularly the WWE wrestlers, are actually wrestling.
That cuts both ways, though, that I think sometimes TV could give you the impression that somebody is more active than they actually are. I mean, the one that comes to mind is Logan Paul, who I feel like is on TV all the time right now. Yes. Over the last year, he's a regular part of television. And I don't know that he's wrestled 10 matches. Over the evaluation period, maybe, in that neighborhood, but not a lot. So again, a guy maybe less active than you'd think. But, I think, and we were having, I think, a text conversation, you, me, and Kevin not long ago about this whole issue of activity. And I do think it's worth, and I don't know that I advocate for changing anything, but it is worth kind of a conversation because it is so different, wrestling, and also so different from company to company.
Right. Well, like what we were saying, right. And wrestling is becoming more and more than ever. I mean, it's been doing this for like the past 100,000 years, but it's becoming more than ever a television product. Even WWE does nowhere near the amount. Right. I mean, they used to do house shows almost every single day of the month, and now they're doing about 8 a month. So, I mean, that is a dramatic reduction, even in the schedule of the most busy wrestlers in the business, which are probably WWE wrestlers. So, I mean, I would be open to that discussion of looking at it a little differently.
But even that, right? You think about like activity, right? So think about an independent wrestler who keeps a busy schedule, working 2-3 times a weekend for different companies, different opponents, different parts of the country, different matches versus a WWE star, let's say Cody Rhodes, who very prolific, keeps a busy schedule. But if you go on Cage Match and you see what it is, he is fighting the same guy night after night after night after night. I mean, and that was the WWF model years ago too.
That was the touring house show model. Yeah, it was the same packaged show.
Is it fair to count that as 15 different wins,
right?
When you're basically a musician playing the same song every night.
Especially because the magazines always were different in a way. It's so funny because Pro Wrestling Illustrated and other wrestling magazines were known for strictly trying to keep kayfabe in the magazines and presenting everything as real. But in a weird way, by covering all those house show matches and talking about them, and writing articles about like, oh my God, so-and-so has just lost 25 straight matches to
Right.
so-and-so. Like those magazines, like our magazine, were actually exposing the business because the companies themselves didn't want you to know that those guys were out there doing all those matches over and over again. That was actually like a trade secret of the industry. They kind of wanted you, even back then, to think, kind of like boxing, that these guys were only having a couple of matches a month, like to make it seem more special and more like realistic. How could you put your body through that 30 days a month without being dead? So, I mean, in a way, the magazines like ours invented that way of judging wrestlers that even the companies don't do.
And the other thing that kind of model affects, we talk about the heel bias, right? And Seth was our number one last year, and the last several years before that, I don't think he'd gotten in the top 10. And it wasn't that he became a much better wrestler last year. It was that for years he was a heel, and so he was losing night after night after night because that was his job. And it's what makes it tough for pick your top Dominic Mysterio or something,
yes,
or The Miz, who are great at what they do, but what they do is get beat up, right?
Right.
And it hurts their case when you're kind of looking at it scientifically.
Well, I told you how I've had that debate so many times online. I just get so tired of it. Like when people are just saying things like, when is Chad Gable finally going to win a match? I don't understand. He's a good wrestler. He should win. Or when you have a heel champion, this is the worst. Oh man, I really have to, not get sucked into this. You have a heel champion of any kind, and people sometimes really like plugged in people who cover the business and everything will complain about how, oh, this is a weak champion. He never beats anyone clean, and he's constantly getting disqualified. And when is he ever going to win? And, well, that's sort of his role. That's his thing. He's a heel. It's like, it would be like, imagine back in the day, somebody going, when is Baron von Raschke finally going to win a match? This guy just keeps losing to everybody. And that's sort of what wrestling is. So I think sometimes we got to step back a little bit to make sure we're looking at it the right way. So yeah, I've been the one more than anyone who's always bringing up the anti-heel bias in the PWI 500.
I just saw something. Chelsea Green gave an interview saying that her goal is to be the female version of The Miz, and I think she's great. I get such a kick out of Chelsea Green, and I think what she's going for, she's nailing. I mean, yes. It's pitch perfect. But that's a character that's going to lose all the time, and I'm sure she wouldn't have it any other way. I mean, that's what that character is.
Yeah, because the only it's like the honky tonk man. The only purpose for even having a character like that win is just to piss people off and make you hope and pray that they're eventually going to lose. That's the even then you're just waiting for the other shoe to drop. It's like to dangle that in front of you. Who's going to beat this person? This annoying person.
And the other complication is, especially when you're kind of dealing with a wrestling from all over the world, is it's done so differently from place to place, and outside the United States, singles matches aren't as important, a lot more in Mexico, obviously a lot more trios. The world champion, the world heavyweight champion in CMLL has not defended his title, I think, since November or something, Gran Guerrero. And wrestles all the time, but it's just not a thing. And in Japan, you see it as well. I mean, top people over there, they relatively few singles matches over the years. It's just a different presentation. So, we're even. How many years will this be now of the 500? From 91.
91 was the first year, so that would make this the 24th. No, I'm sorry, the 34th. The 34th.
Yeah. So even 34 years in, it's like we're still kind of trying to figure all this out. So anyhow, that said, in a future issue, pick up this issue now, latest one, PWI-online.com, and there's another one after this, and then we're getting to the 500, and then we'll have the women's list and the tag team list, so get into the busy season. All right, let's jump into a couple topics. Hulk Hogan. When's the last time we had reason to talk about the Hulk Hogan? And it was just sort of weird last week, like seeing Hulk Hogan all over the news for better or for worse. And again, I don't want to get into a political discussion, but I do think it's interesting to talk about the kind of pros and cons And I don't doubt that. And be a little cynical, but he's got a new beer to sell, right? And he has the beer logo on his shirt, and I'm sure that is part of the strategic calculation. And but it's interesting because on one hand, yes, you've got this huge audience, and you get to be on television, but also it's like, be careful what you wish for, because now you are lumped in to a certain kind of celebrity, right? And who was there? It's Kid Rock and assorted country stars and Dana White, and yes, right. And I'm not passing judgment on all of them, but you have to be mindful of all right, so I'll be in that category of celebrity. And the other part of that, which is maybe, just sort of cynically speaking, something that I think Hulk Hogan would be mindful of is, what does this mean? And maybe this is the question to you. What does this do to your WWE relationship? Do you have any? What would you think Paul Levesque would think of Hulk Hogan speaking at the RNC?
Well, keep in mind that Linda McMahon spoke at the RNC.
Yeah, so, she's a Republican senator, a big Trump donor. That's
Dana White, I think, didn't he? Or he was there at least.
He introduced Trump. So, but those people, I think what made it a little eye-opening to me is that we haven't seen Hogan out there doing that, and he talked about it as well, that he hasn't previously delved into politics or supporting any candidate. So when he finally comes out and does it, he's doing for this particular candidate, and it is a polarizing, divisive candidate wherever you are. I mean, that is the reality. So throwing your support, identifying yourself as a Trump supporter, inevitably is going to alienate a lot of people, right?
I think Paul Levesque is a very political person, and I don't mean in the way of Democrat Republican politics. I mean, he's a very calculated person in how he thinks, and so I don't think he would be thrilled with any person like him or any person they're involved with throwing their hat on one side or the other, because you always run it's the classic thing. You run the risk of alienating half your audience.
Right.
That's the reason they try not to get political. We live in such a polarized age now where it seems like these dividing lines are sharper than ever before, which I think is part of the problem. And again, without getting into personal politics, I don't know. People who know me, they know where I stand on these things, whatever. But even aside from that, just the idea, me personally, I'm not comfortable with this kind of almost idiocracy thing where mainstream celebrities become entangled with politics, and especially the thing of somebody like Hogan, who really is, God bless him, but is a cartoon character and is out there cutting a wrestling promo. I mean, in fairness to him, half of it was a Hulk Hogan wrestling promo, half of it was him speaking as Terry Bollea. I think people confuse the two so much that maybe they didn't notice that, but only the first half of it. But even just to do that, I'm one of those people that I feel like it cheapens. I'll get on my high horse. It cheapens our political system. It cheapens our public kind of our image, our government. To have Hulk Hogan ripping his shirt off and saying, "What you gonna do, Trump-a-maniacs?" I mean, I feel like maybe we crossed that line 100 years ago by now, or at least 8 years ago. But that bothers me more than anything else. And I'd say the same thing if he did it at the DNC. Really, truly. I just think it turns everything into a circus. Now, that said, I don't think anybody should be surprised that he would take this side, just because, look, he and Trump, as he said, they go way back. This is a fact.
Yeah, I would have assumed that Hogan was a Trump voter.
Right. Trump has a lot of connections with WWF specifically, pro wrestling, but WWE, WWF. He has connections going all the way back to WrestleMania 4, and honestly, probably earlier than that for all we know. Like just even running in Atlantic City, which they had been doing for years before. They were running in Atlantic City going back to the 70s, and Trump was already an entity there. So, I mean, that it's not that shocking. And another thing about it, too, which I think is, maybe like a statement of our times. I don't think it should be this way, but I think it is this way. Is that, Hulk Hogan was this like all-American icon, red, white, and blue, right? the flag, apple pie, all that stuff. And we seem to be living in a time when, unfairly though it may seem, all that stuff seems to be associated more with the right-wing side of the political world than the left-wing side.
Which patriotism.
I think that's a shame, because I think you can be patriotic whether you're liberal, conservative, whatever it is, and love your country. But that's not the way it seems that most of the country views it anymore. So again, it almost seemed in this weird way like a natural fit that somebody like a Hulk Hogan, who is like a living embodiment of the American flag in some ways, would lean that way politically and do that sort of thing. So it's not a terribly surprising thing, but it's a disappointing thing from a big picture. Like, I was sitting there watching it with my wife, and we were just kind of like, I was laughing at the absolute absurdity of where our political system is right now, where it really feels like we're close to idiocracy. We're close to, God help me for saying this and manifesting it, but we're close to a world and a time where somebody like a Hogan is not just endorsing someone, but is the candidate.
Well, we're not close to it.
We're there. We're there. Right. We're there.
he was endorsing,
Right. We're there.
Think about it. But I have a few different thoughts on this. As far as like what WWE would think about it, I agree that I don't think they'd be super keen on it. I wonder how much things have changed since the Endeavor merger, because Trump's on UFC all the time, and Dana White's got no issue at all affiliating himself with Trump. Again, he introduced him. Part of me respects that, in that there is, and this is where you do have to try to be fair. Look, the DNC is coming up in a few weeks, and I don't doubt that there's going to be some celebrities there speaking and endorsing, ostensibly Kamala Harris, I guess, at this point. And they'll essentially be doing the same thing that Hogan was, and in maybe the single most important endorsement that the Democratic nominee can get this year is Taylor Swift. And that's what they're, I think, waiting on is Taylor Swift, who there's a thought that she can mobilize young Democratic voters like nobody else. And Taylor Swift got heat when she endorsed Joe Biden years ago. And it is like, it depends how you want to look at it. On one hand, if you're looking at strictly strategically in terms of like your brand and maximize your value and how much money you can make, you could say, well, that's really dumb because you're going to alienate, a country singer, you're going to alienate so much of your base. I'm the big Bon Jovi fan, and you hear it from John Bon Jovi's. A lot of their fan base is rural white American. Go to any kind of like barbecue cookout on the South Shore and on Long Island in the summer, and you're going to hear Bon Jovi blaring. And a lot of them, when they see John out there campaigning for Democrats, are appalled. As I think some were for with Taylor Swift. But the flip side of that is like, I got enough money. I don't care if I lose half my fans. I have a platform where I can reach people and I can do a lot of good. And I respect that. And if that's where Hogan is coming from, I don't have to agree with his politics, but if he truly believes that he's got something to say and he's got a fan base that he could reach, that's fine. The flip side of that is, I don't know how much it helps. I think part of it was, this is where part of the reason why I want to have this conversation was, I think that the Republican committee organizing is thinking like, all right, what are the groups we want to reach? And they want to have, sports people and music people. We'll get the football fans, and we'll get the music fans, the country fans, and all this. And wrestling's kind of hot, right? So who's like the biggest name in wrestling? Oh, Hulk Hogan, right? And that's where I thought it was like a little tone deaf. That's like, Hulk Hogan hasn't been a thing in a long time.
Hulk Hogan is a 70-year-old man.
WWE doesn't touch Hulk Hogan. They were just in WrestleMania, and Hulk Hogan was in Philadelphia for the 40th anniversary of this brand that he was synonymous with at the beginning, and they didn't put him on TV. There is. So, I mean, part of me thought it was like, well, is there some kind of like clapback that the Democrats can do? You'd think The Rock, but The Rock, I
People
think
were saying CM Punk to bring out CM Punk.
that'd be interesting. And The Rock, I think, did endorse Joe Biden 4 years ago and has gone on to say he regretted doing so. I don't think necessarily because of politics, but because, as we just talked about, it cost him some fans, and I've seen The Rock say that, I think, on Fox News. So if you're completely cynical, you want to just sort of like ingratiate yourself to everybody, and I do think that's the way WWE looks at it, which is why Donald Trump, who they built a WrestleMania around, what was that, 15 years ago, and inducted in their Hall of Fame, they haven't touched, and they don't even acknowledge, and I think it's the smart thing for them to do.
There was also something I noticed from a few years back, which shows you also how careful they usually are. Not always. There have been some glaring exceptions. I remember Vince McMahon railing against the Clintons on Monday Night Raw commentary. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah,
but
he always bring out a Clinton impersonator just to
and he enjoyed like digging at the Clintons. But I remember, do you remember when they always used to, in order to get heat on Rusev, they would talk about how he had a relationship with Vladimir Putin?
Yeah.
And they constantly put Putin up on the screen and everybody would boo because he was like the perfect bad guy that everybody hated. Yeah. I don't know if it was the exact moment, but pretty much at the moment that Trump came into the picture and we saw him kind of buddying up to Putin, I think they realized, well, half the audience probably likes Trump, so let's stop making Putin the bad guy. And then you stop seeing Vladimir Putin as a heel magnet for Rusev because they realized, well, this is going to turn off half the audience now.
Best leave all that alone. I think, and again, it's one thing for the celebrity, the individual with a fan base and a platform that is thinking, I will use my celebrity to spread a message that I think is important. It's another thing for a company. That's why I mean, as much as you could distinguish the two, separate the two, I have less of a problem with Dana White personally showing up for Donald Trump than I do now having Trump at so many of these events ringside and having him come out and often to some boos and stuff. And so can you foresee a day where, let's say Trump is reelected, and now we are in full Endeavor merger mode. Can you foresee a day where WWE does that and we see Trump back on WWE television?
Boy, it's so hard to say. I would tend to say no, because they know how much, even if a lot of people there may love him, they know that he provokes such strong antipathy in so many people. Why in the world would you court that? You know what I mean? Including what?
People who work for them. I don't think it's just an issue of the fan base. I wonder, like, what would a Cody Rhodes think?
That's true. And I also remember even at the time there were rumblings. There may have even been stories that got out about how much disappointment there was among a large segment of the employees when Linda McMahon became a part of the administration of Trump, and they were taking photo ops in the White House and things like that. I know there was a vocal portion of the employee base that was like mortified by that.
Yeah. Anyhow, interesting conversation. Moving on. One of I think your pet peeves, right? Talking about Mount Rushmores, and I think Hogan.
Oh, no.
We're talking about.
Well, he'd be on it, so we can't deny that, no matter what.
And another one that I've said would be in my WWE Mount Rushmore is John Cena. And we get the news of his impending retirement, announces it at Money in the Bank. I think it caught people by surprise, not because he's signaled that he was going to do this, but just, kind of like, I don't want to say an off-brand pay-per-view, but in Toronto, it just seemed kind of weird and came out of the blue and announces a tour essentially next year. So he's going to be working between 30 and 40 dates, Rumble, Elimination Chamber, WrestleMania. I think he said it'll pretty much go into the end of next year. So maybe too much to call him full time. He might be eligible for the 500 next year.
I was just going to say, John Cena's back on the 500 next year for sure.
And he is, I think he had all kinds of records. I think he was a 3-time number one, which I think was a record. And I think he was on the top 10 for 10 years in a row, something like that. Yeah, I got to say, when we did Wrestler of the Decade a few years back, and this wasn't my call, but I don't know how we didn't give it to John Cena. I think it's one of those deals where it's kind of part of his run straddled 2 decades.
Who did get it?
AJ Styles, who's awesome. I mean, I got no issue with AJ, but come on, I think that's a crime.
Yeah, because with Cena, it feels like his really run as being the unquestioned top person in the business would if you had to pinpoint years, I would say like 05 to 2017 is probably what I would say.
Yeah.
And that is still most of the 2010s. So
yeah. I mean, he was pretty much full-time through 16, something like that.
Yeah.
Where they moved more toward Roman, but 2010, 11, 12, 13, at least that much, he was like the top guy. And it was such a gulf between him and whoever it was next. So anyhow, a chance to sort of like reflect on John Cena's legacy, even though we've got a long way to go. I guess first thing I'd ask is in terms of handling it going forward, and it sounds like they've got a plan, and it's something that had been talked about and discussed for a long time, and it's just a matter of like doing it now. And I know I heard Levesque talk about that this was the right time, and Cena had this idea in his head for a long time. So it does sound like there's something there. You got to think it relates to that 17th world title, right? And beating Ric Flair.
Yeah, I think he's going to get it.
Do you think so? And would that be the right thing to do?
I mean, I think that because he's so close, I just think the temptation is going to be impossible to avoid. Especially, think about it now. You have him working that many dates all through the year. He's pretty much, especially as far as the TV audience is concerned, he's pretty much going to be like a full-time member of the TV product, pretty much of the roster. And he's guaranteed to be, well, I shouldn't say that, but you can assume or expect that he's probably going to be in main events, possibly challenging for the world title, or one of them. And then you think, well, how many times could he lose? The guy hasn't won a match in forever.
Yeah.
He's got to win. So it seems more likely than not to me that included in that time frame, that's a long time, there's going to be a 17th world title. However, it's far from guaranteed because, like, how do you do it? Do you derail a Cody Rhodes to do it? Do you do you pause him? Then if you do the other world title, I guess the other world title would still count because Ric Flair's got NWA, WCW,
and
everything.
Had when there was more than one version.
That's true. Cena had both versions, so maybe they do it that way. I think that's probably the more likely thing, especially if they're going to go from Priest to Gunther. Maybe that's what you do. You have him vanquish Gunther, finally beat somebody. I don't know.
Yeah,
it's grasping at straws, but I could absolutely see that as one of the things that happens in there. I also think too, this is very, like you said, it's there's been a lot of thought put into this clearly and I think part of it is the response to, it's one of wrestling's biggest tropes and cliches that people don't know how to properly walk away. Guys just don't know when and how to quit. They linger on forever. They wait till you're sick of seeing them or they're no good anymore, or they're, and there have been very few exceptions of people who have tried not to do that. They always wind up getting pulled in. I'm writing this Gorilla Monsoon book right now, and one of the people that really tried, Gorilla Monsoon did it for sure. He walked away. He said, I'm done. And he did it. He's one of the very few. Bruno Sammartino tried to, when he retired in 81, he made this big speech about how he didn't want to be one of those dinosaurs that you see way past their prime. And he did it, and he walked away, and then they dragged him back like 4 or 5 years later, and he's back on the road, doing these matches he shouldn't have been doing for the most part. So I think Cena is sitting there thinking, I'm not going to be like that. Let's do this the right way. I don't know if he's not going to say this in a million years, but I don't want to be Flair. I don't want to be like that. I want to go out the right way on my terms and have a proper send off. And I think the company wants that too, because it's going to help their business quite a bit. I mean, not that they need the help, but it's going to be even more of a boost to their business and during that time period for sure.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about that more in a bit, because I have mixed feelings about how much it's all going to mean. But in terms of like the 17th world title, I think they absolutely should do it, and I think they'd want to do it. One thing we've talked about with Levesque is that a priority for him, maybe to a flaw, is to own a lot of that history and records and stuff like that. That's why you see, the Roman had to beat so and so's, a title, Hogan's title reign record, and Gunther had to beat Honky Tonk Man's, and
Roman didn't beat Hogan's though. He didn't.
He didn't pass the first one. Okay, so he passed. Who did he pass? He passed. Did he pass Pedro?
Yeah, he passed Pedro, and he passed the second Bruno one, which was like 3.5 years. So he's like number 5 now. It's like or 4. He might be 4. It's Bruno, and then Backlund, and then the first Hogan one, and then Roman Reigns. I think
the longest in 30 plus years.
The longest in 36 years. Yeah.
So I could absolutely see them saying like, well, why are we in a business where you can control this? Like, why are we just sort of ceding this to Ric Flair, especially given that he wasn't really a WWE guy? So this is an opportunity for them, and they love to call Cena the greatest of all time now, and now they can sort of own it. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think Flair's even said he'd be okay with it. So I think if there's a good storyline to do it, and my sense is that might be the story throughout the year. So I don't know that he does it at Mania. Maybe he comes short at Mania, and maybe he's down to sort of the last match or something at the end of the year, and maybe it's in Boston or something, and you do it there. But then what? I mean, does he relinquish it? Does he go and lose it the next night? I don't know. I mean, I guess he could do any of those things.
Yeah, he might wind up giving it up. Like, let's say if he wins it in his last match, and then he just gives it up. I mean, that could happen. That's conceivable.
Well, so the other part of this is, how much is this all going to mean? Because as much as I talk about Cena on, Mount Rushmore, or just as one of the all-time greats in WWE, I think I've softened on that a little bit in the last few years, and that's a product of a couple of things. One is a few comebacks that I think have been, I don't know if disappointing is the word, but they just, it's sort of like diminishing returns, right? So
yes,
you see them, it just doesn't feel like it means as much anymore. You think of like last year Mania with Austin Theory, opening match, nothing match, and a lot of losses since then. And I think the other thing is, I think Roman Reigns has closed a lot of that gap in terms of their place in history. And I think Cena still has the longevity, especially when you consider that the first several years of Roman's run at the top really was a failure when he was a babyface. But well, I'll ask you: do you place in history, who would you have higher, Cena or Reigns?
I've said this before. I've gone on the record. I'll say it again. I would say Reigns at this point. Really? I think that Reigns has superseded Cena in terms of how big of a star within wrestling he became.
Really? I didn't know about that.
I think the big benefit that Cena has is longevity. He's been around a lot longer, and he's crossed over into the mainstream. It's like saying The Rock, without question, is the biggest star that the wrestling industry has ever produced in its entire history. But it's not mainly because of what he did in wrestling. You know what I mean? It's because he left. Because there have been people in wrestling who have been bigger than he was, but not outside of it. So awesome. I sort of feel that way with the Reigns and Cena thing. I feel like within WWE, Reigns became the be all and end all to a degree that Cena didn't quite get to. I think you'll get this. You're a New York guy. We're of similar ages. I call John Cena the Don Mattingly of WWE in the sense, and for people that are too young or don't get it,
I think it's a great comparison.
Don Mattingly was for any fan of the Yankees in the 80s and early 90s, he was your guy. He was the top guy. He carried that franchise. However, he represents a down period in the Yankees' history. Exactly. The guy started literally the season after they won the World Series in 81, and his career lasted about 15 seasons. He retires in 95, and then the year after is their first year going back to the World Series since 81. So it's like it's the same thing with Cena, whereas he came in right at the end of the Attitude Era, and now when he's gone, all of a sudden everything not all of a sudden, but everything picks up again in the post-pandemic era, and it's sort of like he missed it. But it's similar to the Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels phenomenon. They were top guys in a down period.
Right.
So I think that's also a big difference. Reigns is the top guy in a high period, So I'm not comparing him to a Hogan or an Austin, but they were also top guys in a hot period, and he's in that category. That's a big difference. However, like Cena was a needle mover, like they like to say with Reigns. Make no mistake, Cena was a guy who, if he was on a show, you sold more tickets than if he wasn't on a show, period. That was proven. But he never was a guy like an Austin or a Hogan where they literally became the whole show. Like that, he broke out from the pack, but he was part of that whole momentum that WWE had where it was the brand, like we've talked about. They were really trying to make it be the brand. And Cena was bigger. Cena was never, I thought, bigger than the brand, the way that Hogan and Austin were. He was their top guy, but he wasn't bigger than the brand. And I think that Reigns is, the only thing, like I said, the only detraction from Reigns is it's just been a shorter amount of time. Like he's been on this incredible streak for 4 or 5 years, whatever it is. I think history is going to judge him, especially if he continues on this trajectory for the next few years, as being a guy who became bigger than the brand.
But he hardly works, and that's a big difference. Cena was also always
yes. That's a different conversation, though. Like do you respect the work ethic and them as a worker and somebody? And I agree with you 100%. And I've had that argument with people too. I feel like what Cena did is more admirable than what Reigns has done. Like I admire that more. I think it's more impressive, but that to me is a different conversation.
Yeah, and I had the same thought, and it is the one kind of like mark against Cena, even relative to all those other people who you might have on your Mount Rushmore, is that those were top guys and helped usher in a hot era for wrestling, right? Whether it was Hulkamania or Steve Austin or whoever you might have. Cena was the top guy, and like you said, was a draw and was a difference maker and a needle mover, but never made wrestling bigger. Maybe, right. I mean, who knows? Maybe it would have been a lot worse if he wasn't there. And part of it was that he never, even at his hottest period, he only had the support of about half the fans, and it was
that's another, yeah. Right? I'm glad you mentioned that because that's important too. We forget that now because now he's sort of like the benevolent saint-like Cena. Everybody loves him. Half the audience hated him.
Yeah.
That was not the case with any other really top guy that WWE.
It was with Reigns. Because I'll say that when Reigns is baby,
right? It was when they were trying to make him a face. Yes.
Yeah, it was worse because Cena at least had the kids, and I'd say Cena's cheering section was loud and passionate enough to outdo the booing section. And that's when my kids were little, and I'd take them to the show, and places would explode for John Cena. And with Roman's run as a babyface, everybody hated him. I mean, he won our most hated wrestler of the year as a babyface, and I think that was, but when Reigns finally hit his stride, he elevated the whole company, right? And he was also, I think, benefited from some really good storytelling and a really good ensemble cast with the Bloodline and the Usos and all that. But he was the centerpiece of it and did great work. So it's interesting, I think it's sort of like Rock, Austin, Cena, Reigns.
Yeah. I think the way to look at it too with a lot of these guys is when you see how they become the entire centerpiece of the show. You know what I mean? At like the Bloodline, the whole thing with Reigns it became, and to a certain extent maybe is still, the main reason people are watching WWE television. It's like it's like if it's a TV show, this guy without a question is a star. And I feel like with Cena, yes, he was the top guy, but he was much more a player on the team. There was a lot more going on that was exciting people just as equally, where I feel like WWE, and it's funny, Reigns isn't on TV anymore, but WWE at one point was the Roman Reigns show. And now it still is the Bloodline show to a certain degree, although now you have a top babyface champion. So it kind of like mixes it up a little bit. But still, he is tied in with the whole Bloodline thing.
Right. And I mean, you can make the argument that Cody has had his success because of Reigns, because
yes,
that was his mission for those 2 years, and he was the guy who finally unseated Reigns. A question I had about both Cena and Reigns that I wanted to pose to you, because Vince McMahon saw something in John Cena before others, and apparently saw the same thing in Roman Reigns. Right? Both these guys were sort of anointed, right? That they were going to be the standard bearers for the company. And to some extent, he was right on both of them, right? I think it took longer to see it with Roman. But what is that thing? What do you think it was that early on was identified? And maybe since we're talking about John Cena, maybe specifically with Cena, but maybe there's some carryover to Reigns. Is it as kind of shallow as they're really handsome and tall and big and muscular and all that? Or is there, some kind of a leadership a factor, something there that you think they saw early on?
You're giving me way too much credit if you think that I can distill that mystery that's been a mystery for generations of what is that it factor. It's so hard to pinpoint because it's so different with so many people. Like, not all top babyface stars or even are good-looking guys. You know what I mean? They might be physically impressive looking in some way. They stand out, but they all seem to be so different. Like Bruno, Hogan, Backlund, Savage. These people couldn't be more different. Daniel Bryan, Roman Reigns, The Rock. Like, they all are very different visually as performers, but they all had the thing that you need to have. And I don't know, maybe it's something that the audience recognizes in you that makes them, I don't even always want to say like you, but that makes them drawn to you. They're drawn to you to see what you're doing, to see whether you're going to win or lose. There's just something, it's like they always say with wrestling, the worst reaction is no reaction, right? You have to make people care. And it's no different from a movie star, a sports star. There's just something about these people that make them, you feel like you have a connection to them, like you know them in some way, like you have a personal relationship. And apparently, looking at all these different people that have done it, there are many roads to doing that. So that's the best I could say about it.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think, maybe answering my own question, I don't think that it is always there at the outset, in terms of seeing that thing. I think it develops. It's sort of, going back to the beginning of the conversation, I remember when Trump was elected, again, not to get political, but a lot of people talked about, well, we hope he grows into the office, right? Whatever he's bringing into it, it is the presidency. So you're going to be forced to step up and grow into the role. And I think to some extent, that carries over in that role as like the standard bearer for WWE. And I'll tell you, I think Roman got there, but it wasn't there at the beginning. So when I ask about what it is that they saw in Roman Reigns, I do think a lot of it was how he looked, and he was, central casting. I mean, great looking guy, long black hair, and, the lineage, he checked off a lot of boxes, but wasn't a good promo. I don't think necessarily showed, and I don't know how he was backstage, but was not a good babyface, did not connect with fans, but got there. I do think Cena had that earlier on. I do think you saw it even before he was a main event guy, even in like that US title. And part of it, I think the coolest thing about John Cena, when you talk about like legacy, is how available he's always been to his fans. And some of that becomes kind of a cliche, but he holds the records for Make-A-Wish, Make-A-Wish granted, all that stuff. And I think, and it's not to say he's a good guy or a bad guy. I don't know him, but I do think that his strategy, his approach to that role was from day one about fan service, and like I will be like the guy who signs the autographs. You know?
And I also think this is a big difference between Cena and Reigns. The big difference that made their careers go on different paths is Cena was unflappable.
Yep.
He never showed any concern at all. Well, no matter, we don't know what was going on behind the scenes, at the fact that the audience was rejecting him.
Never turned.
He went full speed ahead. They never turned him. Reigns was bothered. You could tell it was not part of his character. You could tell they were throwing this poor guy off. He couldn't handle it.
Yeah.
And I think that is why they went the direction of saying, let's try to turn this guy, because it's very clear that the antipathy that the audience has for him, he shares for the audience. That's very clear that he's disgusted. So let's do something with that. Whereas with Cena, it was like, no, man, I'm going to ride this out as far, I'm not going to let any of this bother me. That was a big difference. Yeah.
It really was great. And Reigns, I mean, he would wear it on his face. He looked like a guy who was miserable getting up and going to work and hated it because he knew he was going to go through those curtains and everybody's going to boo him out the building. Fascinating. What do you think the response is going to be to this Cena run? I mean, I do wonder if they get what they want out of it, because again, sort of diminishing returns and fans age and kind of, like the Hulk Hogan conversation, Hogan not meaning what he used to some years ago. I don't know that Cena means what he used to just a few years ago.
I think in some ways, to bring it back to Hogan again, it'll be like the Hogan comeback to me in the 2000s when he was there, which was successful. And it worked because it wasn't that far removed from his glory days, where you still, had a lot of the audience that remembered him well and that were nostalgic about it. I think that's, the reason why they keep him away from TV today, is because all the negative things about him in the news and stuff, they outweigh any nostalgia now because it's been so far removed. 90% of the audience wasn't even born yet when he became the champion. You know what I mean? Yeah. So there's a difference there. Whereas with Cena, he is now in that position that Hogan was 20 years ago, of that guy that gives you that warm, fuzzy feeling and reminds you of when you were a kid. So I think they can absolutely ride that out for a year. I think much like he was in his prime, I think, again, he'll be part of, although to a lesser degree, he'll be part of the package. Just another jewel on the crown for the next year. Another reason to want to tune into the show, watch the premium live event, go to the arena. It's just one more positive. That's the way I see it. I don't think he's going to take over everything, but I don't think it's going to be a failure. I think it's going to be like a nice run that you could get some memorable matches, get him in there with people that he's never worked with before. It's been so far removed from when he was on TV that often, but not too far, like I said, that people don't remember. So it's like, I think it's a perfect time to do something like this with him.
What are the marquee matches, and what is, if there is going to be one, what should be the final match?
Wow. Okay. Well, I know it's a guy he's wrestled before, but I love to see them revisit him and Punk, I think, because also they're similar ages too. And now that Punk is back and everything, I think there's a natural.
That might be a fine. Well, yeah, I guess it should be sort of like the torch passing thing. So maybe on one hand,
I don't mean for the last match.
No, I know, and I wonder. I mean, on one hand, it's like you've got these real memorable feuds and opponents that you'd want to revisit, but then there, as you touched on, you could also help create that next generation. So yeah,
right. I wonder, like, if there would be anything to be gained. I don't think so from doing him and Cody. I almost feel like that's dangerous. Like they're going to turn on one or the other guy. Do you really want that? Like, do you want people to go back to hating Cena again? Do you want to damage Cody's marketability? I'm not sure if that's the way to go either, but I think Gunther is a natural choice.
Yeah.
But I know this sounds crazy, but I think he needs to beat him. Like, I think he needs to beat Gunther because he's lost so many times to dangerous. Like, I thought he should have beat Solo Sikoa. I thought that was the feel good thing to do. Like, what do you? But I guess I'm wrong. I was wrong there because I see why now. I mean, now that they've put all their eggs in the basket of Solo being the top heel, even if I have my doubts if it's really truly working, but they're trying to make him be that top guy. I get why they did that. But I feel like with Gunther's already lost. It's not like that he'd be taking something away from a younger guy, like to have that feather in the cap. He's lost already. Yeah. So I think that could be a really powerful feel-good thing. That could be like a Rocky IV thing to have him beat Gunther. Maybe that's the last match. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. And there's the reality is a lot of the top guys he has worked with, whether it's Reigns or Rollins, Punk. I don't know if he's worked with Drew. That could be interesting. I even think of like younger guys like a Carmelo. That might be interesting. Yeah.
So, it's surprising how many people you don't even realize that, or you don't remember right away that he did work with. The guys that are still on top right now that he worked with, like Rollins and people like that.
Right. You mentioned a Solo, and I don't want to take too much time, so maybe we'll do these all kind of together. SummerSlam is shaping up. And All In is shaping up. All In, we've got Swerve and Bryan Danielson in the main event spot. I was thinking it would be Ospreay months back, but now I sort of understand why maybe you want to hold off on that. Mm-hmm. And I certainly think that is a strong main event, Swerve and Danielson. SummerSlam, it's funny because right after some WrestleMania every year, people start fantasy booking for SummerSlam. And it's like, well, that will be where they do The Rock and Cody. And the reality is SummerSlam comes around every year, and it's always a lot less than people expect. Last year it was Jey Uso and Roman Reigns, and this year Cody and Solo. You just brought them up, are a little. So in terms of marquee value, on one hand, I guess he's the biggest heel in the company, right? I mean,
yeah, it's a weird thing because I feel like he's being buoyed along by a really terrific storyline, a great program that's been very well put together, and it's positioned him as the top heel. But I almost feel like it's like he's in the right place at the right time. Like I don't think that he is quite at the level of someone that you need to carry that position. But I think by default, because he's in the midst of this, it seems to be working. But I think it would work. It would be working a million times better if you had a much stronger character in that role, someone who could really handle that role even better. I don't know who it would be, but hypothetically, I just feel like he doesn't seem ready for everything they're putting on him right now. It seems to be working. So what do I know? But
I totally understand what you're saying, but I also think that's sort of the story they're telling, right? It's that right. A guy who is over his head and is anointed himself the new head of the table, tribal chief, and he's not that guy. And sort of everybody sees that he's not that guy. And then when the guy who is that guy comes back claiming his seat at the head of the table, then you've got the big match. So I agree. On one hand, it feels a little out of place. On the other hand, I wonder if that's sort of by design, because clearly Roman's coming back, and then that becomes the match, right? Roman and Solo.
Yeah. And so I'm a little conflicted on where you go with it because
do you put the title on Solo?
On the one hand, I'm thinking, okay, so far since he's won the title, the challenges that Cody has had. I mean, he's had some terrific matches. His match with AJ Styles, I forget which one, but I know they had two, but maybe it was the second one.
They had the other one.
It was awesome. I mean, they did some great stuff together, but it always feels like a foregone conclusion so far. You just know he's not losing it. I feel like with Solo now, because of the way the storyline's been set up, this is the first time since he's won it that you feel like he's in real danger. And so part of me says that's a great opportunity to have him win anyway, because it makes him really strong to finally beat somebody that you don't think he's going to beat. You know what I mean? But then it's like what you said, if they're building towards Roman, then what do you do if he just lost? He just lost to Cody Rhodes, and now he's supposed to be going against Roman. So I almost wonder if either he gets the title, which I would not feel good about, or because then, it's just going back to Roman again. Either he gets the title or, and I know fans in 2024 hate this sort of thing, but they do some kind of a kooky finish where Roman shows up. And so like there's some like maybe there's like a DQ or something happens or the match just falls apart because Roman's there, or maybe Solo loses because of Roman's interference. I feel like that might be a way. Like if Roman is somehow involved in that main event at SummerSlam, then that might be a way.
Yeah, I agree. And also the other kind of thing parallel going on is Randy Orton, right? And so they kind of are coming to a crossroads, no pun intended, where Solo can go do his thing and Cody can do his thing, right? So Solo moves on to Roman and Cody moves on to Randy. But yeah, I agree. I mean, I had the same thought, like, SummerSlam 93, like if you're ever going to like pull out like the count out or something, maybe not super satisfying, but maybe necessary.
Get the balloons ready.
Yeah. Right? And from there, I mean, we're way ahead, but is Solo and Roman, you think that's WrestleMania? Do you think they go to that before then?
Well, we know they really badly want to do Roman versus Rock at WrestleMania,
but the other thing I talked to you about was the documentary. I don't know if we'll get that.
There's also potential of doing Rock and Cody at WrestleMania, right. And I would hope they would resist the temptation to a triple threat. Please, we don't need that. I don't know. I mean, but see, that's the great thing. That's why we know that they are really cooking right now on all cylinders, because you can have conversations like this where there's so many ways it can go. There's so many players on the team. There's so many pieces on the board. It's very, to use Nick Khan's favorite word, it's very robust. So I think that's a good thing for them.
Yeah. As far as AEW going into All In, their biggest show of the year, you'd think some of these recent, TVs are All In the way they've been loading them up. And clearly the idea here is that they've got this TV deal that's coming up. And I imagine there's some nerves about it because they seem to be really kind of loading up for Bear. I don't want to be this general, but in terms of like just asking about the state of AEW, but it is interesting. What are the stakes right now with All In, Wembley Stadium? I don't know. I haven't heard how ticket sales are going for them, but I think it's going to be really interesting because they went from last year setting this record and selling tickets so quickly. I always thought that to some extent it was the novelty. And it was, because there wasn't even a show lined up. There wasn't even a card announced when they sold it. But I've seen it at Grand Slam here in New York every year. First year they packed the place, a little less the next year, a little less the year before that. But are you concerned about AEW going forward and this TV deal? What happens if they don't get re-signed?
Yeah, and like last year, like you're saying, what they talked about with All In, which I don't think was inaccurate, was that it really did feel like an anomaly. It was such a strange phenomenon because you're looking at a situation where you have a show which I don't want to wade into these waters, but appears to have been very possibly, I guess, the highest attended professional wrestling show in North America ever, or not North America, globally ever. Right. So I mean, you had that, but then all around it, they didn't seem to be able to sell anything out or get any decent crowds, and so it was so befuddling how that could happen. And then people were looking at it going, well, it's a market they've never been to. It's a novelty. So it'll be very telling to see what happens again. I think that there's a decent chance they could do it again, just because it's been a year. It's this interesting franchise where I almost feel like the fans over there have claimed it as their thing, and they might want to come out to support it again, but things attendance-wise and ratings-wise now are even worse for the company than they were a year ago.
But I don't know. But that's the case domestically.
Does that matter? Right.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, before we started, we were talking about how Collision, I don't know when this is coming out, but the Collision on the 20th of July was, I think, the lowest attended TV taping that they ever did. And most certainly the lowest attended Collision taping. So that can't be a good thing, right? I mean, I don't know how you spin that,
Yeah, it's interesting. So remember when they launched Rampage, in that first episode of Rampage, they had Punk on it. That was his debut. And we heard at the time, Rampage is not going to be a B show. It's going to be like another A show. And it quickly became a B show. And then Collision came, and the same thing. Collision's not going to, and that was another Punk experiment. Collision's not going to be a B show. It's going to be like the co-A show. And whatever it is.
Yeah, you remember there was even talk about splitting the brand up. That Collision would be its own thing, and Rampage
for
would
me, it's still AEW. I mean, for me, the one must-watch show of the week is Dynamite. Still,
Yes.
and the funny thing is with this TV deal, there's some thought that they might end up with more TV time. Because even for their ratings not being as strong as they used to, it's still better than most of what's on TNT and TBS. So, do you think that they get re-signed?
Well, that's the thing I think people a lot of times don't realize when they have these conversations. Sometimes people don't maybe have a full grasp on the nature of television in the present day, because it's like, on the one hand, as long as they can continue to deliver higher ratings than anything else that they would put in that spot, I think they're going to keep them on there. However, the one troubling thing, which there's no way they're not noticing, is that the trend is decidedly downward. That's not something you want to see, because that trend is not going to just magically stop. It would be reasonable to assume that it's going to continue in that way. And if it gets to the point where they either can say, hey, if we just run what the hell is that show that leads into it? Oh God!
Not I was going to say Third Rock from the Sun.
No, not Third. I thought of Third Rock from the Sun too. It's sort of with all the nerds in the apartment, right? Big Bang Theory. Yeah. Okay, if they go, hey, we just run a 2-hour block of Big Bang Theory reruns, we'll do just as much or better. If that ever happens, they'll dump it. Or, barring that, if something else comes into the picture, some new content, new show that is courting them, that gives them the potential to do a better audience, they're going to drop them too. But I think that they'll keep them. I just think because of the downward trend, because they don't have a lot of leverage, I think it'll probably be a lesser type deal money-wise, but I think they will keep them.
And it sort of reminds me of the Who Killed WCW documentary series, where maybe they could spin this in their favor, as Bischoff did, in saying, well, if only you gave me X amount more money and better TV time, our ratings would be up and our audience would be up. So potentially, they're in a situation where they could ask for more if they can make that argument.
Right. I mean, they seem to be saying that, but I guess you also have to ask the question, because like we said, leverage is important in a situation like this. So you also have to think about, let's say the Warner Brothers Discovery didn't want them or didn't give them the right number they wanted or whatever. Where else would they go? What would be the alternative? So I mean, like, are they stuck with them?
Where and we might talk a little TNA, but what happened when they got bounced from what was Spike the original? Were they?
Yes.
Well, yeah, it was the FX Works, and then they went to Spike, and then every step from there, it was like a little smaller.
Destination America. Let's not forget
TV. I think
Pop TV. Yeah, that killed them. Yeah.
And they never got back there. So yeah, it's not that somebody won't take AW, because I'm sure somebody would, but outside of WBD and those are the real premier cable networks, it could be a really big drop off to whatever the next tier under that is. So anyway, real quick, don't want to spend too much time, but on TNA, we just had one of the big shows of the year. They put the title on Nick Nemeth. Joe Hendry is a thing all of a sudden, right? And everybody's, do you think, did they miss an opportunity there? Because when he pinned Moose, that place went nuts.
I kind of think they did miss an opportunity, because I was watching that in real time and I'm going, this is the right move. Like when that happened, I thought he's going all the way.
When's the last time somebody from TNA was being talked about? a true like original the way Joe Hendry is.
Because then you have him pop up on NXT and now he's the TNA World Champion. I just thought that was the way, that was like an easy decision to make. But I almost feel like with Nick Nemeth, it's like, he's on this big tour now. He's getting big money. He's won major titles in AAA and IWGP, and he's this WWE legacy guy. I almost feel like they probably were locked into something with him.
Yeah, it's a weird message. And he's a super talent and he's in great shape, so I get it. But it is like when you got, and look, they're not married to anything. They could go and put the title on Joe Hendry next week if they want to. But with that many, a show like Slammiversary, he's got some eyes on it. And you're trying to sort of brand yourself as like, not your father's TNA or whatever. And you put the world title on the old WWE guy. I don't know, when there's legitimate buzz around Joe Hendry, so I don't know what to make. What do you make of the NXT TNA relationship? I mean, in some ways, you think really good for TNA and that it gives them some exposure, but clearly WWE is not going to like cede anything to them. So,
right.
They had Joe Hendry in that battle royal some weeks ago, and he got the big pop and people knew who he was, and then they tossed him out of there, really quick. So I do wonder, it's like, if they're going to showcase you only to make it clear that you are below their developmental, what does that say?
But I think this is a different company now, though. This is a different WWE. And so I almost feel like you're going to see something a little different here. Like, I think Jordynne Grace is all but practically working for them at this point. I mean, it seems clear to me, especially following her and things like that. I really get the sense that she's counting the days down for when this TNA contract runs out. They clearly are very interested in her. They have showcased her better than any talent I've ever seen who didn't work for them that was on their television.
Yeah.
So I think that may be something you see more of, which again is not a good thing for TNA, though, where they're going to start identifying people that are really good that they want. I think Joe Hendry's in that category too, that they're eventually going to get. And I think when they set their sights on somebody like that, it's in their best, because of the relationship with the two companies now, it's in their best interest to present them somewhat strongly, even when they're not working for them. Now, that's something Vince never would have done until they had pen on paper. But I think you're going to see a little bit more of that, where they're thinking, we're definitely going to get this guy or girl. So let's keep putting them on TV. And then once we sign them, we're off to the races. So, I wrote a column about this recently, is, that the relationships, while it's nice for the fans, a lot of times it's very one-sided in the way that a lot of times these companies sometimes come to regret working with an entity like WWE in the long run. You could also compare it to, I'm not even, I'm asking this as an open question. I mean, what was the better relationship? Because TNA was working with AEW directly. They were doing a lot of this too, where you had the people. I mean, God, Kenny Omega had their title. And they haven't done anything like that yet. So, and I think did FTR win the TNA tag team titles, or maybe they did? I don't know.
No, they had a few. I don't think that was one of them. No,
but
yeah.
That's an interesting comparison. Like, what was the better relationship?
What it also sort of reminds me of was WWE and ECW in the late 90s or what have you, when Vince was, funneling some cash over there to kind of help them out, and they had the ECW invasion on that very memorable Raw in the Manhattan Center.
Yeah,
and I'd be curious what, if any, financial arrangement there is between the two companies, because I sort of feel like it helps WWE more than, I mean, it clearly does, because you get some more talent, and it sort of creates it for WWE that sort of forbidden door feel. But I don't know what it really does for TNA, other than kind of give them, I guess, the cred of being affiliated with the biggest wrestling company in the world. But it's only their developmental,
And so they're also getting NXT people on their show,
they're not sending Trick Williams over there,
right.
They're not getting the top tier people, So
yeah, I mean, I think I think WWE is very smart. They have been very smart, though, in doing it this way because they know that the TNA brand is kind of closer to the NXT brand. I still think the NXT brand is a more high profile brand than TNA, but it's closer. And the fan bases, even though this is a very different NXT than in years past, the fan base is much more of a wrestling fan base that knows more of what's going on in other companies and things. There still is that element. Whereas if they had tried to do it with the main roster, it would have been a total disaster. I think all those kids and those people in the audience, they would have no idea who these people were. And on top of that, it would be such a disparity, in terms of the WWE main roster people and the TNA people. I think this is the way to go. This is the way to do it.
Yeah. The awkward thing is that, you get WWE releasing people for them to show up in TNA, for them to show up in NXT,
That's true. Ash by Elegance. That was really weird. And they did that cutesy thing where the announcers were going to say that she was Dana Brooke or something. And then they said Ash by Elegance instead. But
I even wonder with Ziggler, right? I mean,
right.
Did we see TNA, world champion Nick Nemeth on Invade NXT sometime in the next few weeks?
I think it's a great opportunity if they were to do something like that. I think it would be a fun thing to do. Because he also was the NXT champion not that long ago,
right?
And he was feuding with some people there. Why not?
We got Ethan Page as champion there, and I guess now Josh Alexander, his former tag team partner, looks to be getting a big heel push in TNA. So yeah, it's fun. Anyhow, all right. That'll do for today. Before we go to the interview with Roxanne Perez, I want you to tell folks what you got going on.
Oh, so much. I am coming close to, I've been talking about it forever, but finishing my book, Irresistible Force, The Life and Times of Gorilla Monsoon. I expect to have it done by the end of the summer, and I mean September, not August, the actual true end of the summer. I need as much time as I could get. And so then I'm going to be looking at, getting all the other pieces in place. I was just visiting with Maureen Morella, Gorilla's widow, looking at photos and documents and things, just fascinating stuff that I want to incorporate in the book. So I'm excited about that. And I want to mention the Patreon too. I mentioned it last time, but it's patreon.com/shutupandwrestle. It's associated with my podcast, but I do commentaries for classic wrestling shows. Like you can watch the show and listen to the commentary. Like I just did the first Saturday night's main event. I did the first Clash of the Champions. I'm going to be doing the David Von Erich Memorial Parade of Champions with Flair and Von Erich, after the whole Iron Claw thing. And so if you go to that Patreon, Shut Up and Wrestle, you can subscribe at the $5 tier. It gives you access to the commentaries. And so people have been doing that, and hopefully there'll be more.
Excellent. Sounds great. Thanks so much, Brian. We will do it again soon, probably post a SummerSlam, and then we can talk about the show. So until then, right now, why don't you tune in to this interview as featured in the latest issue of Pro Wrestling Illustrated. Here is the NXT Women's Champion, Roxanne Perez. On this topic of, and we could just jump into here, of representation, it's not lost on me. You're holding that beautiful belt, and Bailey's got one, and Damian Priest has got one. You've got three Hispanic Americans holding titles. And am I forgetting anybody else? Maybe there's even another one that I'm not aware of.
No.
What do you think the significance is of that? How much does that mean to you?
Oh my God, it means everything to be able to represent the Latino culture, because growing up and watching the WWE, I felt like I needed more of that representation. So when I did see that representation, to me as an 11-year-old kid, it was like, oh wow, I've always wanted to be a WWE wrestler, but now seeing a Hispanic girl going out there and doing her thing, or it inspired me a lot to be like, okay, this is so possible. So for me to be that representation now for young kids to look on the screen and see themselves in me, that it just means so much to me. And I hope that I can be that representation for little boys and girls to truly know that it's so possible, because it is.
Who was that for you? I know you're an Eddie fan, right?
I am an Eddie fan now. I wasn't watching at the time that he was wrestling, but I'm always going back and watching. And Eddie Guerrero was someone that, like, inspired me a lot. Rey Mysterio, AJ Lee, she was a big inspiration for me because growing up, I didn't see too many short Latina, small, petite girls on screen. So to be inspired by someone like Kelly Kelly and then not really see myself too much in her, but knowing that she was friggin' amazing. But then going and seeing AJ Lee, who was a tomboy, she was small, she was Hispanic, and seeing that, seeing like, oh my gosh, she's got the same skin color as me. This is so possible. And just like you wouldn't think that something like that would just inspire you so much, but it really does. So yeah, I'm
Yeah.
so glad I get to do that now.
I've already talked about AJ being your dream match. So are you like putting the screws to Punk all the time, trying to encourage her to come back in?
Definitely, yeah, I try, but he tells me that he's doing the same thing. He's
Yeah.
trying to get her to like come back, he's pulling her in, but I hope one day she decides to come back and have a match with me.
Yeah, it's interesting, so you're a fan when, I mean, I'm trying to do the math here. But was it sort of, you mentioned Kelly Kelly, and that's obviously a very different time than where we're at now. So this is still very much like the Divas era when you became a fan.
Yeah, I was like 10 years old, so that had to be like 2010 was when I started watching. Um, so yeah, it definitely was still like kind of Divas era. They were having like 2 minute matches, if even
Yeah.
that, like they got 2 minutes of screen time. And I was there glued to the TV screen, like waiting for that 2 minute Divas match. And now to see that we have Royal Rumbles, we have Money in the Bank matches, we have Hell in a Cell matches, like it blows my mind because I craved that as a kid. I was wanting to watch the women put on matches like that because I knew that we could. So now seeing all of that and the evolution of women's wrestling, it's so cool to me, and it's so cool that I get to be a part of it.
Yeah. So even as a kid watching, there was part of you that was thinking they deserve more than this. They can do more than 2 minutes.
Yes, absolutely. Always, I always thought that, like I said, AJ Lee was one of my favorites, so I always wanted to see her in those types of matches. And then uh, I think the four horsewomen were really the girls to break down those barriers and and make all those matches happen. So yeah, really cool.
Yeah. So I know you get started training under a Booker T. I wanted to ask some about that. I mean, I can't imagine doing my job each week in front of like my teacher, essentially, kind of like this ongoing sort of performance review. What's that like for you having him there at ringside, a guy who had a hand in your development, kind of still watching over you each week? Is it cool? Is it a little nerve-wracking?
It's really cool. Honestly, not so much nerve-wracking. I think it made me feel more comfortable. He came in maybe a few months after I got signed, so that was honestly so cool for me because, coming into the WWE and this has been my dream since I was a kid. So obviously there's nerves and I wanted to hit all my marks and do everything right and having my teacher that taught me all of the ways be there and kind of be able to navigate me a little bit more like hands-on because obviously before I did train at his wrestling school for a good 3 to 4 years.
Okay.
So now being able to continue learning from him all the time, like every Tuesday after my matches, he's always there to give me feedback and tell me what I'm doing wrong, tell me what I'm doing right. So it's honestly awesome to have him there.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah. I know before you were at NXT, you were in Ring of Honor, and I was, a big Ring of Honor fan from way back. But obviously by the time you got there, it looked so different. And that was just this, it was a weird time for everybody, certainly a weird time for wrestling. But what was it like for you cutting your teeth at this promotion that had all this prestige, all this history, but essentially doing it in front of nobody and for that while, right?
Yeah, it was awesome being there. It definitely got me ready for the WWE. I feel like if I didn't have that experience, maybe I wouldn't have been like kind of pushed on that rocket like right when I got here. I learned so much being there, from working in front of nobody to working in front of a stadium. Um, Definitely got me ready for the WWE.
Yeah. What do you remember about? Were you there when the news came of them essentially pulling the plug on the company? What do you remember about that time?
Oh my gosh. So I vividly remember getting the call and getting told that Ring of Honor was no longer going to be a thing. Um, Essentially, after a few months of me being there, I was still champion. I was gonna have no job, no contract.
Oof.
So I actually clearly remember the last Ring of Honor tapings. I was pretty sad, because everything was coming to an end. I didn't really know what the future held, but I had high hopes. I remember watching the matches that were going on that day. Sorry about my dogs.
That's right.
I remember watching the matches that were going on that day after I had mine, and I got a call from a number that I did not have saved in my phone. So I walked outside and I was like, hello. And uh, the person goes, hello, this is William Regal from the WWE. Do you have a minute? And I literally just like, my heart dropped. I completely freaked out. I had never gotten a call from the WWE ever until that point. And that's the day that he asked me, hey, we love your work. We want to see if you would like to come for a tryout in December and see if you would like to be a part of the team. And I could not believe it. That was like honestly the best day of my life. It could have been the worst day, but it was the best day.
Yeah,
Um,
when one door opening and one door closing. Yeah.
yeah, it was like just everything fell into place exactly how it was supposed to. And yeah, after that, I was signed to the WWE.
Yeah, so great. And I know, you came into NXT in a really interesting time because you had, what some fans I think looked at as those NXT glory days, the takeovers and in Brooklyn in front of 15,000 fans and these huge matches. And then there's sort of like the reboot, the NXT 2.0 around the time you come in. And such a change, and there were people who were really negative to the new NXT. Um, what was it like for you being there in the middle of this transition? And to this day, are you sort of like protective, defensive of your NXT versus the NXT that came before you?
I mean, I always wanted to be a part of the NXT that came before me. Black and gold was what I grew up
Hmm.
with. So it was definitely different coming in and coming into NXT 2.0. But I also felt some sort of like pressure, but motivation to be the face of this new brand. We're starting this whole new brand where it's different, it's new, and I got to be a part of that, and I got to be a part of the start of that. So it was pretty cool, pretty cool. And I like I said, I got to be the face of that brand pretty soon. So to have Shawn Michaels like have that faith in me, and within a few months I was the champion for NXT 2.0. It was pretty awesome and pretty good feeling.
Was it discouraging at all that the crowds weren't where they were at first for the black and gold? And I was just in Philly, and that was incredible. What was there? And I was there at Stand and Deliver, so they're very much back, but they didn't come back right away. So during those kind of periods where fans were still kind of figuring out what 2.0 was it discouraging? Was there a question of like, will we ever get back to that interest level that was around for black and gold?
Yeah, I don't think it was discouraging. I think we were all kind of figuring out what this new brand was together. So I feel like we were on the same boat as the fans were, trying to kickstart this new brand and see where it went and try to make it the best possible brand that we could make it. And like you said, like now this past Stand and Deliver in Philly, it was insane. It was the the most fans that we've ever had at a Stand and Deliver, and that was NXT 2.0. That was the brand that Shawn Michaels created. That was what we all created as a family together. And it was pretty cool to see over the past 2 years of how much we built this new thing and how everybody just loves it now. So
Yeah.
cool.
Absolutely. I think it was you, right, that did that video with Sean before Stand and Deliver, where he kind of going over his old matches. Yeah, I just remembered that. And what I thought was really cool was that he clearly saw some of him in you, right? So what's that like? And I'm a huge Shawn Michaels fan, as I know you are, very much, and the Mount Rushmore of great WWE performers. So it's like getting music lessons from Elvis Presley or baseball lessons from Babe Ruth. I mean, to have him at the helm, and then again maybe see something in you special, that's got to be really great.
Absolutely. Like you said, Shawn Michaels is literally Mount Rushmore of professional wrestling. So now to be under his learning tree, and like I said earlier, I had always wanted to be a part of the WWE. So finally getting there was so much pressure on me at first, because I was just like, okay, am I as good as I think I am? Does WWE think I'm as good as I think I am? And to have Shawn Michaels come up to me and say, hey, like, you're the one, was just absolutely insane to me, because even now still I go to work and I get feedback from him, and I still can't believe that Shawn Michaels is my boss. And it definitely gives me a great sense of pride and confidence, knowing that Shawn Michaels, the greatest of all time, thinks that I have one of the biggest futures in wrestling. So it's really, really awesome.
Is there, because you're so young still, and obviously have had so much success, is part of that a little I don't know what the word is. It's sort of intimidating in that I think to like Drew McIntyre, right? And Drew talks about sort of being in the situation you were, where he's the chosen one, and everything was going right for him, and then obviously, fell hard, got tossed from WWE, and had to kind of work his way back. Years later, now doing amazing work, obviously. But do you worry about it being too much too soon? This is all too good to be true, kind of thing.
I think those thoughts definitely ran through my head when I first got signed, and I had this championship, that first run. Those thoughts definitely got into my head. I was like, "Oh no, is this where I'm peaking? Is it gonna get better than this?" Just all those thoughts, all those doubts, being surrounded by all of my heroes since I was a kid. I'm Bailey. Uh, Becky, Charlotte, Alexa Bliss, all these women, Natalia, that I just grew up loving, and then now they are my coworkers, and it was just a little scary for me at first. But now I feel like I definitely have that mindset of like, okay, second time around, I deserve to be champion. I am confident enough in myself to know that I am one of the best women's wrestlers that the WWE has, and I can go against my heroes, Bailey, Natalia, Charlotte, Alexa Bliss, and hold my own in that ring. So yeah, I feel like now I finally definitely feel like, okay, it was always my dream to be here, but I definitely belong here.
So the latest evolution. This is nothing that you get the naysayers, and this is part a compliment that you were so likable, right? I mean, you're sort of like the natural born baby face. Seeing you in the role we've seen you in the last few months, some people question whether it could be a good fit. How was it for you making that change? Any second guessing on your part whether this would be a good fit?
I was really excited, honestly. I've always played the babyface role, which is why I can kind of see why people would question it a little bit and wonder if it would work. Um, I'm having so much fun with it. I'm definitely getting out of my comfort zone since I have always been in that babyface role. I think it's really fun. I think that I am definitely stepping out of like I said, out of my comfort zone, out of the little box that I was in, and I feel like I'm definitely going to be able to do some really cool stuff in the future.
Is it and you hear a lot of people, a lot of wrestlers say, the most fun they ever had was being a bad guy. But I imagine the psychology of it is going to be so different where you're working for booze, right? So you go into this with that desire to pop a crowd, and now what you want is the opposite. So I mean, is all to say, like, ever get your feelings hurt when they're booing you, or is the
No.
rush just as much as applause?
It is just as much as the applause, honestly. So, like, you're so right. I want to go out there and I want to get booed. As a baby face, I was like, come on, I hope you guys love me. Come on, cheer
Yeah.
for me. And now it's kind of like, please hate me, like, boo me, do whatever you want because I am welcoming it. I thrive on it. So I don't get my feelings hurt. I think it's really fun.
Is it tapping into some ways kind of like your worst self, right? Because they always say in wrestling that, like, wrestlers really find success when they find themselves, right? And there's a part of Steve Austin's always the example you hear about, that like he became Stone Cold when he really sort of kind of let himself just be himself. So to be a successful heel, I would think to some extent is like acknowledging that you're not that great a person, or there's part of you that is evil or bad, and making it work. I mean, you'd see like Dominic Mysterio, how great he is. I saw him getting booed at his wedding.
Oh
So
yeah, that was
yeah.
great.
So is there a part of you that's got to, like, it's not just put on, but you've got to find that part of you that's kind of a jerk?
Yeah, definitely. Because I mean, everybody has that switch. Everybody, gets pissed off every now and then. So being able to kind of like bring more of that out of me, and then it's so much more fun, obviously, doing it in front of a crowd and knowing that that's like someone else going out there. It's not me. It's someone else. So being able to completely just throw myself into the unknown that I've never touched my whole entire career. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, yeah. So the next step is always, obviously, you're in developmental, and the hope is to graduate to the main roster. Um, is there or any apprehension of about making that move, because things change so much, and you've had, without naming names, you've had people who have made that transition, and they didn't quite catch on, right? And maybe in NXT they were the hot thing, and it just didn't really carry over to the main roster. So can you talk about sort of the timing of that? Is it, I want it right away, I want it, you want it the first day you step into NXT, you're just waiting to get called up, or is there an appreciation that uh, it'll take the time that it takes?
Honestly, when I first got to the WWE, yeah, I feel like everybody wants to go to the main roster. So it was even now like a little hard being able to or having to stay in NXT when you really want to like go up there and like get that break and do everything that because obviously since I was a kid, I wanted to be on Raw or SmackDown. But now being in NXT and being able to become two-time NXT Women's Champion, I realize how much fun that I'm having here. And I have gone to the main roster. I've been a part of two Royal Rumbles.
Hmm.
I've made an appearance on SmackDown. I've made an appearance on Raw. So I've had a little taste of everything there. So I know for a fact that when I've gone up there, I've showed up, showed out. So I have a good feeling that once I get that call up, all those girls better be ready because I'm gonna take over.
Yeah, yeah. And again, you're still young, but I imagine that's sort of like a mixed blessing, because you could, that could be an excuse to just do this forever. Right? Like, oh, you're still young, you're still young, you're still young. And meanwhile, obviously, you've been here for a number of years now. So in part because you started so young. So, I mean, do you feel that clock ticking in your mind? Like, by the
Of
time I'm whatever 25, I better be on the main roster.
of course, but I feel like even when I was, I've been training for about 9 years now. So to really think about that, like, oh dang, like I've been in the wrestling business for almost a decade.
Yeah,
I definitely feel young but old in wrestling years. So that part of it kind of it makes me a little bit more impatient to get up there, and I feel like I know I have all the tools to succeed up there. So yeah, there's times where I am just, I feel like the clock is ticking, and people always tell me, you're young, you have so much time, but I'm like, I know I'm young, but I have so much to give right now.
right.
But it's also, about just enjoying your journey, and enjoying all the steps that it takes to finally get there. And that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm enjoying all of this. I'm enjoying being able to learn from the best ever, Shawn Michaels, having Booker T there, being able to continue learning from him, training with, Terry Taylor, Sarah Amato, Matt Bloom, just all these people, Fit Finley, Johnny Moss, being able to learn from everybody. I'm just taking everything in, and you never stop learning. So I'm learning everything that I can so that once I get up there, like I said, just take over.
What are the pros and cons of working in front of a same kind of smallish crowd where I imagine it's a lot of the same faces each week, and maybe not a real representation of what other fans would think. So, and I know whether it's Stand and Deliver or the couple of Royal Rumbles, you've certainly worked in front of bigger audiences. But when you've made those changes and you worked in front of the bigger audiences, is it enlightening? Is it very different in terms of kind of the feedback you're getting versus in front of that NXT crowd each week?
It's definitely different because, of course, we're going from like 200, 300 people to like thousands and thousands and thousands of people. But I think it's really cool just to be in front of the NXT crowd every week, because it is usually the same people. So being able to understand what they like, what they don't like, what excites them, what doesn't excite them. It's easy to kind of tell that because we're working in front of the same crowd rather than going from city to city to town to
Right.
town. So I feel like I can definitely read off of the crowd a little better. Um, yeah, and it kind of reminds me of like the independent scene,
Hmm.
wrestling. Sometimes you wrestle in front of 10 people, sometimes you wrestle in front of like 300 people. Um, I love it, regardless of whether there's a few people in the crowd or a million people in the crowd. I just love doing what I do.
Are you when you look ahead to joining the main roster full time, are you excited about the prospect of the travel, or is that the part that you're dreading? And you hear the veterans say, they don't pay me to wrestle. That's the fun part. They pay me for the travel, and it's a grind, right? And if you do this for another 20 years, it's 20 years of airplanes and rental cars and not sleeping in your bed several nights a week. So is that
Yeah.
exciting? Is it a little daunting?
It may sound crazy, but all of that sounds like so exciting to me. My favorite part of being on the indies and being with the other company that I was with was being able to travel, getting on planes, going to see different states, you know, going to all these different venues. That was my one of my favorite parts, getting to see meet all these different fans from all around the world. Because obviously we're just in NXT, just in Florida, so we don't necessarily just stay in Orlando. We go to different towns around Florida, but it's kind of the same fan base. So being able to go outside of Florida and meet all these different fans and wrestle in all these different places, that's excites me a lot, and I really miss that. So I'm excited for that.
Sure. Is WrestleMania the ultimate goal? I mean, I imagine, I don't know how cliched it is. I mean, some young wrestlers say no, it's not. But you being in there in WWE, being around WrestleMania for a number of years now, being in Philly a few weeks back, is the gears already spinning about what your WrestleMania experience is going to be like?
Yeah, obviously WrestleMania is like the ultimate goal. But I just want to create a legacy here in WWE. I want to win as many championships as I can. Oop, sorry about that.
That's right.
I want to become a Grand Slam champion. I want to wrestle at every single WWE pay-per-view there is. And yeah, one day I want to main event WrestleMania. So I've got a lot to check off my list, but I'm getting there. I've already got this.
Yes. Do those goals get in the way of other life goals? And maybe it's unfair, but this always comes up when I talk to women wrestlers, getting married, being a mom, all that stuff. I mean, is that also on the to-do list? And you look at somebody like a Becky Lynch who's done it all, and there are others. So how do you balance those?
Yeah, so I've always just pro wrestling and getting to the WWE has always been my number one priority. So I definitely want to accomplish as much as I can in the WWE before I get to those things. I think Becky Lynch was super inspiring in the fact that she created a legacy for herself, and then she had a baby, was off for a little bit, but came back, and she's still freaking killing it. And she has her little kid with her there. Like I would honestly love to do that one day. Create a legacy, have a baby, come back, and still kill it. So yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure you could. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much. This was a real pleasure to get to chat with you for a few minutes. I'm a fan. Love the work you're doing.
Thank you.
Excited about putting this together for the magazine. And yeah, hopefully we make some history with the first Latina on the cover of PWI.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited about that. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Thank you, Roxy. Have a good one.